everyone, and welcome to another episode of Retailistic. We are so excited to be joined today by Parisa from Flexport. Parisa, thank you for joining us.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit more about your role at Flexport and, a little bit more about yourself as well?
Yeah, so I joined Flexport just about 10 months ago. I came from Amazon. I spent about 12 years at Amazon working on different technology solutions across the company. But the main theme of those tech solutions that it was focused on how you enable people who typically have difficult access to a certain product or a certain solution to be able to democratize that access. And so I ended up actually finishing my career there, launching a lot of the last mile delivery business. So, a lot of the prime vans you see driving on the road today, that's part of the business that I created. And I decided to come over to Flexport because the company was looking to re engage their focus on the small business customer segment. And when I joined Flexport, the idea was to democratize freight forwarding and to really focus on consumer grade solutions related to international freight movement. But the company always had a vision of extending their solutions across the full supply chain. And so as I came on, we had the fortunate timing to be able to bring on Shopify Logistics into the Flexport overall portfolio of services. And so I led the acquisition of Shopify Logistics and Deliver. And that helped us really connect our solutions from just being international freight focused to all the way doing domestic movement of goods. And so my team is now responsible for small business services as well as fulfillment services.
That's a lot to accomplish in one's career, and I think you've got a long kind of runway ahead of you as well. I think I shared with you during the pandemic, my kind of interaction with Flexport, we had started with some of my dear friends a charity called Retailers United, and we were trying to help get PPE into the hands of those who needed it. So originally, right, that was frontline workers, the essential retailers, and then, kind of non-essential. I don't love that word, but non-essential retail. And,
Yes.
it was unbelievable how generous Flexport was with their time, their insights, their information, and helping to connect. So a company that is very near and dear to my heart at an incredibly stressful time in all of our lives. You guys were really there for everybody. And I think people do remember that. Can you dive into on the SMB side? So maybe I'll take it one step forward. So Retailers United, where we stand today, is we help a lot of small businesses actually with either, kind of supply chain or grants or just kind of looking at their digital transformation. So this conversation is incredibly relevant still from a Flexport perspective. Can you talk about the kind of the challenges you're seeing from an SMB perspective, how they, and whether that's supply chain or otherwise, and the niche. I mean, hey, it's a very large market, but the niche that you've carved out for yourselves and what that looks like in 23 and in the years ahead.
Yeah. When I think about launching a small business, especially one that's trying to deal in e-commerce, there is a suite of things that that business owner has to sort out, from figuring out how best to do marketing to acquire customers. Because typically each of these small business owners are experts in the products that they're developing, but they're not necessarily experts in how to get their products in the hands of customers. So they have to make choices around how best to market and advertise to acquire these customers. They have to figure out where they're going to sell, whether that's their own custom website, if they're going to sell through marketplaces like Amazon or Walmart or Shopify, and having to worry about the logistics of actually moving those goods, all the way from who do I use to manufacture the goods to who do I use to actually move those goods. And so when we were looking at the areas of opportunity for us, the things that we really wanted to be hyper focused on is that our solutions were very consumer grade. What you notice in the logistics world today, and even in some of the best logistics providers in the world, is that their solutions are either hyper focused on one leg of the supply chain, or they are stitching different services together, but they're doing it in a way that is still very jargon heavy. And you kind of need a PhD in supply chain to be able to know how to use it well. And enterprises can deal with that, either because they can hire really great supply chain professionals to figure that out, or they make enough revenue for that company that they'll get a dedicated account manager to be able to support them with the nuts and bolts of how to use the systems or to manage the logistics. We just didn't accept that. And we wanted to make sure that the solutions felt out of the box and just like any other consumer solution this business owner would use to run payments or marketing or advertising. And so that was really one of the core principles of what we wanted to do. And then the other side was building a solution that was truly end to end. And I think what's unique about how Flexport has come about solving this problem is that we looked at all the movement of goods that needs to happen. It's about 20 different logistics services that you need to move from factory floor all the way to customer door. And some of those services aren't just logistics focused. You can think of things like customs support and figuring out how to get a customs broker, how to insure your product, and make sure that the movement of goods is insured the right way, as well as capital solutions, because you need a ton of money to be able to move these goods sometimes in certain places. And so we really thought holistically about what are not just the logistics services, but the value added services along the way. Um, and lastly, we wanted to make sure we were a neutral platform. All of the connections that we wanted to have, we were really focused on enabling small businesses to sell in all the places they wanted to reach customers. And I think that's a somewhat undersold piece of this pie. Is being neutral is a very important piece of this solution. We want you to be able to sell on Amazon, on Walmart, and on Shopify. And we don't care which one you choose. We just want to make sure that we can support that growth if and when you want to make it happen.
So I think I led the think tank for Li and Feng for many years
Yep.
and was based between Hong Kong, and we had an innovation lab in Shanghai that we called the Explorium. And it was amazing. So part of what we did is we also brought Western retailers to China. Now as Coresight, right, which we spun out, and many of our team we're blessed is still with us. We're now doing a lot of global cross-border, but into the US. So we're working with
Mm.
companies in South America, Japan, Greater China, and it's been, I mean, you hit on like, I could probably fill an entire hour with customs conundrums, is I think the
I
nicest way
know.
to put them. But you know what? You may be the first supply chain expert I've ever spoken to who even mentioned that. Right? Because it's like so far down, people are like, oh, you've got somebody, you've got a person, right? You've got people to do that. But
Totally.
right, we were working with some of the largest, kind of companies in the world, and things would happen. For me, it would be like, 2 in the morning, and right, we had a real customs issue that we were trying to address. And so yes, and it's very jargony. It's an incredibly jargony kind of, sector. And many of the people in supply chain, right? I mean, there's a passion. And I will say, I would love to hear your own story. But when I was an analyst might have been right really early in my career, when I was just starting in food and drug, I remember visiting a super value kind of DC and watching all this product. And right, and you're dealing with super value in the grocery industry, right? A lot of like highly perishable product.
Yeah.
And just kind of sitting there, there's like this hum, right? Like I actually liked background noise. There's this like hum, and I was like, I have found, right, like my place. I love being here. I love the excitement of it, right? Like trying to understand kind of like what's happening when. And that was, we'll just say that was probably well over a decade ago. And so that was really kind of my introduction into. And then, early on I was an e-commerce analyst, and was part of the Webvan IPO. And so all these things, and thinking very differently about kind of end-to-end solutions. And really this idea, we've done a lot of in like Web3 supply chain. So kind of starting from kind of raw material to shelf. And I think when
Yeah.
you're working with small businesses, right, that's how they're thinking. And having a partner that can help you every step of the way and is talking in your language so that you can make decisions quickly. I mean, I think that is just a game changer. So how did you get started in supply chain? And what are, as we talk about the SMBs, I think you've helped us kind of compare and contrast the challenges between large corporates and SMBs, but maybe kind of break it down a little bit more granularly too.
Yes. And let me address one piece of it before we talk about my introduction to supply chain. One thing you mentioned that actually was a big learning for me coming into Flexport, I've been hyper focused on tech first solutions. Technology can solve all the problems. I think one thing I'm identifying is in specific parts of the business or the supply chain, humans are still necessary. There are highly, highly manual things that happen in the supply chain. And a lot of that happens in the international freight movement. There's been so much technical innovation downstream, but not very much upstream. And customs is a perfect example of this. I spoke at this session with a bunch of different government professionals, and I was like begging them, please embrace technology, because like we let us help you kind of move goods easier and help you do things in a more compliant way. But unfortunately, there are still many, many, many components of the process that are done literally on paper. And customs is a
Fax
good,
machine. Like
yes,
I've been in factories and literally like people are showing me their orders and I'm like, what is that? They're like, that's the
totally,
order for like very large multinationals. And I'm like, but how do you even know what that is? Right. Like, I mean,
exactly.
that's the thing. And I think you actually, I just want to jump in as well. You brought up something I think it's really critical is around right there's a lot of this is very political, right?
Yes.
And so I mean I became quite the chassis, who knew, right? I would become a chassis expert, but that is actually where I spent a lot of time. So going back to most people who are listening to us today have no idea what a chassis is, right? Going back to the jargon around this. So I think that you bring up something incredibly important. And, for Flexport to have those kind of relationships with the government and at least be able to help them understand the differences in challenges from right SMBs to corporates. I mean, that's a huge opportunity for, I think just to stimulate change.
That's right. And I do like a lot of small businesses. We chatted with hundreds of them as we were putting the solution together. And one of the things they cared about was ease. But a huge component of that ease was also having someone giving them peace of mind. And sometimes that was a human. And so for customs in particular, our solution still enables the human touch in the right places. And customs is a great example of where if you have goods that typically do get stuck at the border, we're going to make sure that someone's talking to you about that and figuring out the best solutions to kind of work around that, because we built a lot of automation, but not everything is automated, and customs is one area that it's not all on Flexport's shoulders. Like there's a lot of work on other partners along the way, governments included, that need to help us move slowly to a more automated place. But we've kind of injected humans in the right spots, which for me was a really great learning of, operations problems are human problems at the end of the day. And so this kind of bridges back to where I started in supply chain. When I was joining Amazon, I was coming out of a journalism degree and was really interested in publishing and all that. So I started in the publishing side of the company. My first job in supply chain was a program that was hot off Jeff Bezos's desk. It was called Amazon Magic. And the vision was that they were going to get goods to people's from the fulfillment center to someone's door in an hour or less. And as you might be aware, that program was rebranded to be called Prime Now. But my job was to build the technology solution to enable the drivers to be able to do that work, the transportation systems essentially, because all of that was had to be built kind of from the ground up. And to do that, I was forced to sit in a fulfillment center and learn how the goods had to be moved. And to your point, like you heard the hum of the refrigerator, it sounds so romantic. I sat there and I looked around and I was like, this is terrifying. Everyone is yelling, and why are things like moving so fast? Can everyone just calm down? So it was terrifying for the first moment because I'm so used to sitting and working on books and publishing.
Well, my
Uh,
my biggest fear is when they're like, "You have to put on a hard hat," and I'm like, What is gonna happen?" Right? Like, I have pictures actually. I think they're on LinkedIn somewhere. Like, we literally have like full head to toe suits in some cases. I mean, and then we could probably. This is like such a great topic. I mean, I've literally had to go into like negative 35-degree freezers. I mean, and this is. I mean, this is a very unglamorous side, right, of supply chain. And I
yeah,
think that, as you think about it, it's you said something, I actually wrote it down. Like what people don't realize is when you talk about Prime Now, you built it from the ground up. That's how complicated, right, this topic is. And I don't know what your thoughts are, but early on in the pandemic, right, all we talked about was supply chain, right? And the minute the stores opened, right, everyone was like
yeah,
in-store technology because you know what? It's like not it, hot potato.
yes,
And I have a theory from what I've seen, so we'll call it over a decade worth of data, but not quantitative, more qual, is that when a CEO comes into a new organization, that they are willing to take on like a supply chain kind of problem, if you will,
mhm,
opportunity, challenge. What we find is when people are more kind of entrenched or have been in an organization for years, because when I was an analyst and we would hear about certain technology vendors that were retailers were going to implement, I literally would downgrade the stock. And I will tell you, I wasn't right like 2 or 25%. I was right 100% of the time because every time it was a disaster.
Hmm.
And so it is interesting too, right? For going back to like that peace of mind that you
Yes.
referred to, I think that, having someone to call, and even like you're creating a community now, I think that really is critical, and that's what's so needed.
Totally. And when you look at the decision for Shopify uh, to ultimately spin off the Shopify logistics arm, like first you go back and you say, why did they even create one? And I think a lot of marketplaces who are dealing with e commerce solutions or small businesses of varying sizes and varying product categories, they find this like consistently common theme, which is logistics is where things fall apart. And logistics is the line in their P&L that's often the biggest and the one they have the least control over. And so it's not surprising at all that Shopify decided to build Shopify Logistics because it was a no-brainer in terms of the thing that was really holding back their merchants. But you have to be able to be really laser focused on ops and have people who understand why those challenges exist and want to obsess about solving those challenges. And ultimately, this ties to my supply chain story too, which is like it was mayhem. But then the moment I was sitting down next to an engineer and we were literally watching the physical problem in front of us, and we could say, oh, like this doesn't make sense. Let's just move this here. And so, us with an operator literally sat down and moved like the tape on the floor to the other side and then saved, 5 seconds a package, which is incredibly non-trivial for a company like Amazon. It immediately gives you this like gratification I've never gotten when I built other technology. And so the solutions are incredibly impactful, and they're based on the movement of humans and how humans think and how humans operate. And so, and this isn't a criticism of Shopify at all, because ultimately Toby saw that he couldn't obsess about the problem the right way. And that's why he called Flexport to say, help me out. And Flexport being obsessed with supply chain problems and looking at them kind of in a horizontal way rather than a vertical way really set us up for success to be able to take on that challenge and solve it for merchants in a very focused way. But I think your point is spot on. And when people don't understand the root cause to the problem, which is oftentimes a human literally has to take a sheet of paper, understand what to do with that sheet of paper, and then move something from A to B, you won't ever really solve the problem the right way.
It's actually a really interesting point. And, one thing that I'm hearing more and more, especially as we're kind of, on the cusp of the holiday season, is around reverse logistics.
Mhm.
And so, right, that is probably, I was just with a retailer who was saying that, they have several $200 million stores. And he's like, what do you think our returns are? And I'm like, I have an idea of like, you're doing this mental math. Okay, 35% of what they sell is this and 20%. I was so far off. It was frightening. And so in their $200 million plus stores, they have $110 million of returns.
Oh, wow.
And so
Wow.
you start, I mean, that's just a lot of stuff. It's like so far greater than anything I could have ever possibly imagined.
Yes.
And where these guys really need a partner to help them think through not only the what's our policy, but also, how far outside the lines can people color? And then
Yes.
how do we attract, the right talent to do that?
It's a fantastic question. And this is where the marriage of different logistics or partners or services is a really important piece of this. So Flexport, as an example, has different returns partners who help us engage on the customer facing side of returns to the logistics side of returns. And your point is spot on. When you have a better front end experience, your customers are more likely to make better purchase decisions. But it's inevitable that people will change their mind. And so finding a way to be able to process the return in a smarter fashion to understand, was it a size problem? Was it the color you didn't like? Was it the touch and feel of the product you didn't like? Getting that feedback loop there to help the merchant make a smarter decision about how to sell their products is a huge component of reducing this reverse logistics problem. And the partners we leverage to do returns help us with that. And so it's also data that helps us from a logistics standpoint to say, this product will still sell. So hold it in this place versus this product looks like it's a dud. It's just not working. And so giving that feedback loop back to the supply chain as well as to the merchant is critical. And the other piece you and I had chatted about before is about leveraging your supply chain to produce revenue for your company
Yep.
rather than just to continue to cut costs on your P&L. And returns is a fantastic example of where if you just show that you're enabling returns for the customer, they will be much more willing to try it out. And that means that you'll have a little bit more of a more complicated supply chain, but the outcome of having that much more people click buy is a really great outcome. And so it's this matter of marrying like a supply chain solution with a revenue driver for the company that I think is really magical.
I mean, on the revenue side, I'll tell you how I've thought about it, right? Which is many of these smaller companies, if if they're just kind of vertically integrated, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But when you're carrying other brands on your site, if you can better inform, upskill, help them kind of think differently about their supply chain. First of all, they may pay you for that IP or that intelligence. So that is real
Yes.
revenue. But secondly, if you then have a higher sell through rate or whatnot, I mean, there is, I mean, and I think this is such almost like a heresy, right? I mean, nobody talks about supply chain and revenue, but to me, it was actually one of the most interesting aspects of kind of our pre-call, because it's an uplifting way for a topic that nobody wants to really talk about unless it's like not it, right? A hot potato,
Totally.
but it's, and how does, as we think about, at Coresight, we have our AI council and we meet every other week and talk about difficult topics and supply chain. I can show you the chart. Basically, it's like, marketing, right? That's like incredibly high return, very low cost, and very low time. Supply
Mhm.
chain, high reward, medium cost, really long, right? And so, how do you think about, right? And that's the kind of like end to end. How do you think from more of a Gen AI than a predictive AI perspective, what the impact is, and where should, retailers and brands get started?
Yeah. I think it's really important to understand the things that influence customer behavior to start. And one of those that we had chatted about before that I think is very underrated is delivery promise. And Amazon understands the value of delivery promise. That's why Prime is the most prominent delivery promise kind of brand that exists, I think, on the market today. And Shopify is building out the Shop Promise brand, and we're helping support them and continue to proliferate kind of that brand broadly. But even some of the largest brands that I've talked to during my time at Flexport didn't understand the value of a dynamic delivery promise. And I think a lot of people think delivery promise is expensive. And moving to 1 day delivery is incredibly expensive, yes. But customers don't necessarily need 1 day delivery, especially customers in certain parts of, for instance, the United States don't even expect that. So just having a promise that's accurate, where you can take your static 7 to 10 day delivery and change it to something that says 5 days or 3 days, that's dramatic sales conversion for these companies. And I think sometimes, just even the way you framed it, sometimes it feels like supply chain enhancements are costly or they take time. This is a perfect example of something where if you're just smarter or you leverage the right technology, you can gain wins immediately. It's just a matter of caring and understanding that the customer values something that you didn't realize that they valued. But in terms of generative AI, the other thing I'm really excited about with the solution that we have is being able to leverage the broader customer data we have to be able to help build recommendations and ultimately automation for merchants to think a little bit bigger about how and where they sell their services. And so, just as a very simple example, I've talked to many, many, many Amazon sellers, and they are very nervous about selling outside of Amazon because they're terrified that their supply chain for Amazon will break. And so they don't want to mess up their Amazon store. It's their best performing store. And so they don't even feel they can experiment with Walmart or with Shopify because they'll break their Amazon relationship. And that's one of the core things we're trying to solve for, is helping you build a single pool of inventory that you can inject into as many places that you want to sell. And by leveraging that single pool of inventory and all the other customers who are selling in those places, we can also tell you, hey, this SKU might do really well on Shopify because other Shopify sellers who are selling that SKU seem to be doing really well. Or you seem to not have your inventory hosted in the East Coast, but this product has been selling, or other similar products have been selling really well on the East Coast. So let's consider moving some inventory there. So just leveraging the power of kind of looking at anonymized data, but at a much broader level, and influencing and helping merchants who would never have had access to that data if they were selling in just one spot or leveraging a fulfillment capability for just one marketplace, I think is a massive potential win in the future.
I mean, I love this idea around dynamic delivery. So, quite a few years ago, I got to know Jet.com very well. And one of the things that, between Mark and Katie, that I really, going back to my passion for supply chain, that made so much sense to me is that the consumer, right, they get to decide, right? So if I have slower shipping speed, I save 50 cents or a dollar. If I
Yeah.
agree not to return the product, I save another dollar. And so you start to think about, right, we then put the power, because I think there's something to be said about putting the power into the hands of the consumer. And I'm sure that's a very challenging model to execute, because we haven't seen that widely kind of spread in terms of the retail industry. But my question is more around with BOPUS, in-store pickup, and home delivery, and whatever other amalgamation those all kind of come together. How is the SMB thinking differently about, kind of, I think one of your domains of expertise is really on last mile.
I think so. The one thing I think that's important is democratizing the things that, for instance, a fantastic marketplace like Amazon offers to more marketplaces. So I think at the end of the day, the basics is still what merchants want to be able to accomplish. Choice is like the gravy on top. And we want to enable people to be able to offer compelling delivery promises across as many places as they want to sell. Because at the end of the day, that's still ultimately the majority of what customers want, is getting a reliable delivery promise, and one that's fast-ish. It doesn't have to be one day, but it shouldn't be 10 days. And so that, I think, is still super valuable, and merchants just want to be able to have access uh, to offering that in as many places as possible. And so that, in my mind, is kind of table stakes, and we're still just generally, as an industry, not at a good place there. Unless it's Amazon, you really aren't competing in a super compelling way. And so that democratization to me is really an important lever to be able to offer even the smallest of businesses. And then I think choice is a really interesting offering, particularly in my experience in last mile. There are certain areas like neighborhoods that are really hard for drivers to be able to find the homes, or neighborhoods that just are more urban, and so it's easier. People are already walking home. It's easy to go pick up something from a store or a 7-Eleven than needing it to be at your home. But it's a balance, and it's not the same. It's not a one size fits all.
You brought up something that I think is so incredibly important, which is right outside of Amazon right now, this kind of seamless delivery network, right, is in short supply, no pun intended. And so I do believe that with, let's just call it, international players have seen that, and there's
Mhm.
been a gate that's been opened, and we've started to see a lot of new entrants who have grown at a speed, once again, that I never in a million years would have expected. And so I think if retailers, big and small, don't focus on this,
Yes,
that we're going to continue to see a lot of new entrants, because, and I think it just goes back to what you said very early on, is right, you built it from the ground up, right? That's incredibly difficult to do if you're a retailer. And I've always felt
totally.
retailers, I mean, it was like the whole thing with when I was at Liam Fung, I'm like, when people are trying to do this vertically, I'm like, no, 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 right? Like, you need to focus on the trends and the consumer and whatnot. Like, take this off of your plate so you can really do what you do best. So I want to close one question, and I may have two, but I'll try to keep it to one. But how did you come up with the name Flexport Revolution?
We debated the name a lot, and we came up with many different boring ones. The revolution, immediately when we thought of it, it gave me goosebumps. And the reason I love it is because it's about not accepting that small businesses don't have access to the best solutions out there. And one of our taglines, it's a visual one, so it's hard to represent verbally, is supply chain with chain crossed out and said change. Because I think when you
Mm.
hear even the word supply chain, you kind of start falling asleep. And I think
Well,
it's
no,
just,
I do not fall
you
asleep.
don't,
I get
you don't.
energized.
But I think like a business owner is like supply chain, yeah, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But like what we really wanted to do was revolutionize how logistics partners, how small businesses, and how the marketplaces that enable those small businesses to grow thought differently about supply chain. So we were revolutionizing not only the solution we were handing to them, but the way people were thinking about why this solution was compelling, because we can't do it alone. And I think one of the things that's really cool about being a part of a smaller company like Flexport is that competition is good. It's healthy. We want people to join us in the revolution. And that's not just merchants that we want to purchase our services, but the people who enable our services to be rich and compelling. And so it truly is a revolution, and not accepting that supply chain is a legacy, difficult thing to solve.
You know, it's so funny because in my mind, I don't look at Flexport as small. I look at it as really big, and I'll tell you why. It goes back to something you said earlier on, because there are so many single point solutions.
Yes.
And with Flexport, right, you're literally pulling all of those together. And
Yes.
so in my mind, it's like it's really big. And it's big in terms of what you have the permission to do. It's big in terms of, the potential for 24 and beyond. And I think it's also big in terms of bringing people together into a community, because the ability, I mean, I have PTSD from different, kind of supply chain projects we've worked on. I mean, we have had companies throw things into containers that were not on bills of lading. I mean, I could like literally like we're gonna have to get like a fire pit and some marshmallows, and like it'll be like therapy. We'll bring in some SMBs, right? We're doing this. We'll get like the drinks going for you, so we're gonna have a good time. And
Yes.
it's gonna be supply chain therapy, not retail therapy, right?
That's
And
right.
so, or supply
Exactly.
change
Supply
therapy.
chain.
And so I really think that, we're at a critical juncture, I think, more than many people realize. And I do feel that it has a lot to do with this ability for new entrants to come into the market in a very easy way, because their supply chains, once again, they did build them from the ground up in the last 20 years,
That's right.
because they're very new companies. So with that, what do we all need to think about, in terms of our own organizations for
Yes.
24, big or small? And what is Flexport doing differently to kind of support some of those changes that we need to make? And how quickly can they happen?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that people are misrepresenting in the world of operations today is that the pandemic is over and we've solved the problems. The boats are moving, the planes are flying, goods are moving around the world. The pandemic taught us a ton of very important lessons, and it showed us how fragile our global supply chain is. And just because movement has restarted does not mean the solutions have happened. And so I think now we had a very hard, forced look at what was broken in the connection points across all the legs of the supply chain we talked about. I have now seen many, many, many of those paper cuts. And when you look at them all together, the human is bleeding heavily. And so we need to all work together to digitize the data that's core to the movement of goods. And Flexport is obsessing over this problem because at the end of the day, when you don't have data, you don't have visibility to the problems. And when you don't have visibility to the problems, you won't know what solutions to be solving. You can hear your customers' complaints, but you won't really know the root cause to the problem. And so I urge governments, I urge logistics companies, I urge even e commerce solutions to think about how they can digitize and provide access to as much data as possible in a way that still maintains trust and compliance, obviously, and privacy, but in a way that enables all of us who are trying to play in the sandbox of moving goods as seamlessly as possible to do so in a way that we truly understand the root cause that caused the issues to come about to begin with.
I'm going to leave it there. I kind of summed up some of what we talked about today. We covered a lot of topics, but I do think that, supply chain as a revenue driver is really kind of out of the box thinking. This idea around dynamic delivery, right? We hear about dynamic pricing all the time, but I don't know if I've heard those two words strung together, dynamic delivery, outside of this conversation. I think what you just said around this kind of digitization of data and kind of this being core to the movement of goods, but also this like harmonization as well in organizations. And then, having a centralized platform, because so much of supply chain is single, kind of point solutions. And then lastly, I think we all forget what we experienced in 2020 around like the fragility of supply chains. And I think we need to think about how to kind of revolutionize, if you will, the supply chain industry. But that starts today, right? You can't put it off anymore. I mean, it's,
That's right.
I think it's this stressor that we see in so many boardrooms, to be quite honest. And I want to, first of all, your background is amazing. I think that, I mean, you're really impacting change, you as an individual and as part of Flexport, in what's a very challenging kind of sector and topic. And the ability though to really kind of bring us into a new dawn. I'm gonna like pass that over to you, and
Yep.
we'll get our marshmallow fire pit going, and I look
We want
forward to.
the tide to rise for all boats. So yeah, I'm super excited about the potential, and thank you again for having me.
This is great. Thanks everyone for joining us today for another episode of Retailistic with Parisa from Flexport. We look forward to having you on our upcoming episodes. Please join us, and we will be there for the journey. Thanks so much. Please like, subscribe on your podcast channel of choice, and have a great week.